Okay, so in this video we're going to take a look at a quick introduction to the JavaFX library that's available in Java. So this JavaFX library is going to be used to create GUIs and graphical applications. The way that it's going to be structured is we're going to have different controls. Essentially, these are going to be objects of classes that we add to our application. These will make up the visible objects in a program's GUI. We've got a couple of examples that we're going to go through throughout Chapter 12 on some basic controls that we want to take a look at. These are going to include labels, text fields, and buttons. So labels are going to be controls that are used to display text. Specifically, this is going to be for non-interactive text, so just things that are displayed as, say, a title for a particular section of your program, maybe a label that's associated with a text field, like say in a form, you'd have a text field where you enter some user input, and then the label next to it would tell you what that text field is actually for, maybe things like your name, your phone number, your address, etc. The text fields themselves, these are going to be controls that are used to display a field for users to provide keyboard input, so essentially just somewhere where you can type in some input for your program, for your application. And then we're also going to have buttons, which are just controls used to display a button with some kind of caption or some text inside of it. And then the user will click this button in order to perform some kind of action. Okay, so as I mentioned before, JavaFX is a library, so it's going to consist of a set of different packages, and in each one of those packages you're going to find different classes. So with these three controls that we're looking at here, label, text field, and button, each one of those is going to be a class that is located in a package somewhere in that JavaFX library. For this particular part, we're going to come back to this a little bit later after we've gone through our first application. Then I'll go ahead and describe a little bit about the design process that comes with JavaFX, or just generally building GUI applications. So we'll go ahead and skip over this for now. And the primary thing I want to focus on for now is going to be dealing with the application interface. So the application interface is another one of these classes that's provided in JavaFX. This one's going to include two very important methods for us. It's going to include the launch method and the start method. So the launch method, as the name would suggest, is going to be used to actually launch or kind of deploy your application to get it all set up and actually running. And then the start method is going to be used to actually do all of the preparation for your program and to then actually display that application. So the start method is going to be particularly important because this is a method that we're going to have to actually implement. Whenever we first create something using this application interface, that start method is initially not going to have any sort of functionality or behavior associated with it. Eventually I'll talk a little bit more about precisely why it is that the start method initially has essentially no method definition. You have to provide a method definition for it, but it does exist somewhere in that application interface. So to give you a quick example using these two methods, we'll go ahead and take a look at a piece of sample code that we're going to go ahead and write up. So we'll kind of walk through this briefly at first. So we're going to have two imports. One is going to be for that application. So that's going to come from the application package. Another thing that we're going to need that is essential for creating a JavaFX application is going to be the stage class, and that comes from the stage package in our JavaFX library. So you can see those two import statements at the top. The next part is going to be the class header. So we're going to go ahead and create our JavaFX application. We'll give it any particular name we want. Since this is going to be our first attempt at creating a GUI application, we'll go ahead and call this my first GUI. And this is going to extend that application class that we have. Inside of the body of this class, we're going to go ahead and set up two methods. The first one is going to be the main method that we always need for any Java application that we write. Inside of the main method, we're going to make a call to the launch method for the since that's part of that application class that we're setting up. We're also going to go ahead and pass in the args. So in certain cases, if you had wanted to, you could set it up to be able to accept command line arguments. For all of the applications that we're going to be writing, you won't really need to worry about that. We're just going to be doing that as a sort of formality. Additionally, we're going to go ahead and have that start method in there. So we're going to have to actually implement that, meaning we'll need to provide a definition for it right here. So we'll set that up as that public void start. We're then going to pass in, or at least set up as a parameter, our stage. So in this case, we're going to be calling that our primary stage. And then we go ahead and have two method calls on that primary stage. One is to go ahead and set up a title for the overall application. And then the second one, where we call that show method, that's to actually make sure that the application will display. So if you forget to include that show method at the very end of your setup in the start method, then your application won't display. So if you ever run into an issue where you've written all of your code, you're running your program, you don't get any errors, but you can't see your application window, it would likely be because you forgot to include this call to show at the very end. So we'll go ahead and move these slides out of the way so we can go ahead and try to set this up. So if you have NetBeans set up and ready to go, you can go ahead and open that. So we'll get that running. And inside of here, go ahead and close out this start page. We're going to go ahead and create a new project. So we're going to get that set up. And for this, since we're going to be working with JavaFX, depending on the version of Java that you're using, you will very likely have JavaFX provided automatically. So if you do, you'll be able to select that right here. We're going to select JavaFX as our category. And then we'll select JavaFX application as our project type. Go ahead and click next. We'll then go ahead and give this a name. So based on what I showed before, we'll go ahead and call this my first GUI. And then we'll go ahead and finish. So we'll go ahead and create that. And once it's created it, let's go ahead and open this up a little bit so we can keep track of everything. So we've got our project right here, my first GUI. We've got our package, my first GUI. And then we've got our Java file or class in here, my first GUI. So if we take a look over here, we've got a few extra comments that I'll go ahead and remove. So we'll go ahead and delete this one at the top. We'll leave our package statement alone. We've got several different imports that it's including, and the reason that we have so many right now is because if we take a look at the code itself, when you first create a Java application or JavaFX application in NetBeans, by default it tends to give you a lot of extra code for a pretty simple application that has a single button plugged into it. For the most part, we don't really need most of this, so we're going to go ahead and start deleting a pretty large chunk of this code. We'll remove the extra comments that we're not going to worry about just yet. Make some adjustments for the way that I style my programs. And remove some extra comments here. And essentially I'm going to start to slowly clean this up so that it's kind of looking like the that piece of code that I just showed you. So we'll go ahead and remove all of these extra imports in the middle. The only ones I'm going to keep are going to be the application and the stage. So we'll go ahead and delete the rest of these. And once I do that, then it's going to give me a couple of errors since those don't exist anymore. And we'll go ahead and remove essentially everything else right now. We'll go ahead and retype the rest of it as we go. And leave this extra part right here. And also adjust this. Okay. So by default in NetBeans, they want to put the main method underneath the start method. It's more or less up to you. Typically what I prefer is for the main method to be at the very top, since typically when I'm looking at an application, since the main method is the entry point, it tends to be the first thing that I want to be looking at. Oops. Okay. So we've got our main method right here. We've got our call to launch. We're passing in our args. We then also have the start method right here. So we've got that public void start. It's also included this @override, this annotation for it. So this doesn't actually do anything in code. This is basically just a comment. I'll talk a little bit more about exactly what this means a little bit later on. It kind of comes with this explanation about why it is that the start method initially has no implementation. It also helps to explain another thing you may have noticed, which is that we've got the name of our class right here, but we've also done this extends application at the top. So in order to make sure that we can use methods from application the way that we are doing right here, we have to include this extra little bit. There's a particular relationship between my first GUI and application that, again, I'm going to hold off on explaining until a little bit later. The primary thing that you need to know right now is just that every time that you want to make a JavaFX application, you will always have to do this extra little bit in the class header. Okay. So inside of the start method, we're going to go ahead and include 2 lines for right now. So the first one was going to be to set up a title for our application, and then the second one was to actually display the application window. So for the first one, we're going to grab our primary stage, and we're going to do dot set title. We'll have our double quotes. Since the title, it's expecting a string, to go ahead and get that set up. For this one, we'll just go ahead and put in something like my first GUI application. Just go ahead and display that as our title, and then we'll also go ahead and make sure that the window is showing. So we'll do show. We'll go ahead and save this, and then we'll run it. And once we have everything set up, we'll go ahead and see this application window displaying right here. So we can see the title up here, my first GUI application. We've also got a couple of extra little buttons, the usual minimize, maximize, and close. As long as this window right here is open, you'll notice that the application itself is still running, and then as soon as I close this, then it will go ahead and terminate that. And then it will also let me know at that point that my my build had been successful. Okay, so this does serves as a quick demo of getting an application set up. As we go forward in the next couple of videos, we'll start taking a look at how to actually add some content to it. So if I leave this up for a moment to take a look at it, you can see that we've got a title, we've got a couple of buttons that we are essentially there by default, certain necessities that come with it, but the actual window itself is just kind of a blank canvas right now. It doesn't have any content, there are no buttons or text or anything like that inside of it. So what I want to take a look at in the next couple of videos is how we can actually go about adding some content to it. So I want to start adding, at the very least, maybe a couple of labels, text fields, and buttons, even if they won't necessarily do anything just yet, just to be able to at least see that content being added to the window. In addition to that, as we start to add this content, we'll also talk a little bit about how to actually customize the look or the appearance of our application window, at least on a very basic level for right now. So we'll take a look at all of that in the next couple of videos.